Hello, uh, hello, dear all. Today, I'm going to speak something about the critical appreciation for a poem, how to write a critical appreciation of the poem. This topic I have chosen for the benefit of those students who want to write critical appreciation of a poem but don't know how to do that. For this purpose, I chose this topic. Hopefully, after watching this video, all of you will be able to understand a bit of the process through which we can write the critical appreciation of a poem. Well, the very first thing is that all of us should know that a critical appreciation is not about criticizing something. It is rather about critical reading of the poem. I mean, we are not required to say the things which are bad in the poem or to say that the poet has not done any justice with the poem, but rather we need to have a deeper understanding of the poem, for which purpose critical reading is required. Now, what is critical reading? This is necessary to know before we start understanding how to write critical appreciation. By critical reading, I mean that the people should know what are the meanings of the words used by the poet in the poem, and what is the rhyme scheme of the poem, who is gonna be the speaker in the poem, what are the figures of the speech, I mean similes, metaphors, etc. used by the poet, and how much is there the intertextuality, what is the language and the style of the poem, what is the genre of the poem, and in what context the poem has been written, and what is the tone of the poem. Now, to understand this critical reading, meaning of the words is very easy thing, that we may be able to find that the words which are difficult, which are ununderstandable, may be understood with the help of a dictionary or may be understood with the help of a thesaurus. Similarly, every one of us knows that the rhyme scheme can be found out in the ending voices or the sounds of the words of a poem. If these words match in certain patterns, there could be the rhyme scheme available. For example, if first line has ended in ah sound, second line has ended in ba sound, the third line has ended in again ah sound, and fourth line of the poem has again ended in the ba sound, we can say that the rhyme scheme is going to be AB, AB. Besides the rhyme scheme, we should also know what are the stanza patterns or line patterns of the poem. If there is any fixed stanza pattern or unfixed stanza patterns in the poem, that may be told about, talked about, and discussed about. But if there is no stanza pattern, then we can say that the poem is without any stanza. And if it's a short poem, we can also talk about the number of lines there. By reading the poem, we can very easily guess about the speaker in the poem. For example, the poem Wedding in the Flood has 4 to 5 parts in it, and in every part the speaker changes, and from there we can guess which speaker is talking and what he's talking. Then we can underline the figures of speech in the poem by thinking what are the symbols there, what are the metaphors and similes and other figures of speech. And after that, we can also read the poem or reread the poem to find out, is there an intertextuality? That means if the poet has used some references, some lines, some words from any other poem which is already published, possibly some poets do so, some writers have been doing so, and that is intertextuality that may be found out and then talked about as well. After that, we need to look at the language. What is the type and style of language? I mean, is it the language which is difficult, or the language which is suitable to poetry, or the language is not? From the language, we can also guess the kind of language used in the formerly occupied, British occupied countries, maybe a Pakistani English type, or it may be an Indian type of English or Chinese type of English. And after that, the style may be having many things in it. I mean, the short sentences, long sentences, pauses, punctuations, or capitalization, or dashes, whatever has been used may be included in that. We can also look at the genre of the poem, whether the poem is a song, or it's a kind of sonnet, or it's a other type of poem which is epic poem, or it's a normal small poem. We may be trying to find out which genre of the poetry it's going to be. And then sometimes the contexts are there. For example, some of the Wordsworthian poems are written in the context of French Revolution, and some other poems like Pope's Rape of the Lock is written in the context of 18th century satire and criticism. And then we can also look for the tone of the poem. I mean, by tone, I mean whether it is the forceful tone, it's the mild tone, or it's going to be very much obedient type of softer, active or passive tone. Whatever the tone of the poem is there, that should be noted down. And next, when we have read all that, in order to develop the good critical understanding of the poem, we can then begin to write our critical appreciation. As we know that the critical appreciation is meant to create a better understanding of the poem, for this purpose we should go first of all about the writer, about the poet, who he is, what type of poet he is, and to which country, to which society does he belong to, what are his main ideas. These things should be considered before starting writing the critical appreciation. And after that, every reader who wants to write a critical appreciation should read the poem twice or thrice at least, in order to have a better view what is going on inside the poem. The meaning of the difficult and unusual words especially should be caught, and these meanings should be seen in the context. I mean, what's the type of meaning these words are giving? And after that, these meanings, these understandings, these thematical ideas of the poem should be relevant to the title of the poem. We should look at the title again and again to see what the title literally means, what the title idiomatically means, and what the title thematically means, and try to relate this with the title of the poem. Rhyme scheme, as I said already, should be found out, and the rhyming words which could be possibly available within the lines, not only at the end of the line, but also may be available within the lines in the shape of certain assonances or consonances that may be noted down. Then the writer should go to look at the settings of the poem. I mean, the settings, maybe the time settings, the space setting, what is the place about which the poem is going to be, what is the time to which the poem goes to refer to, and then the genre of the poem should be judged, and certain reasons may be given in order to say that this is going to be the genre of the poem. If we are noting these points and arranging them in this sequence, that will be called a type of critical appreciation. We need to write the summary of the poem as well, and that is why in order to write that summary, we need to read the poem again and again in a very good way. For example, if one needs to write the critical appreciation of the poem titled Prayer Beads by Daud Kamal, we can start by thinking about the title, and by thinking about Daud Kamal, we can get some ideas about him from online. For example, who he was, a Pakistani poet definitely. He's been writing in Pakistani type of English, and many things he talks about philosophically as well as about the culture of Pakistan. That is why we have a bit of idea about him. And if you don't have the idea, you can go online, search the book, and read different poems of the poet in order to find out what type of poet he's going to be. After that, if you look at the prayer beads are used as the small components or the pieces in a tasbih or in a prayer string, where we can look at their shapes also. And here, the kind of philosophy behind that rosary thing is not the kind of prayer, but rather it is going to be the shape of those rosary beads. Most of the time the shapes are sometimes very odd shapes, and sometimes round shapes are there. And in any shape, if you have an idea that these beads are there and the shapes of these beads come to your mind, and then you look into the poem, find out whether these shapes are important there or the philosophy related to these beads is more important there. For example, the poem begins in the line by saying that under the shade of a willow tree, where the river bends on a rock pool, prayer beads rise to the surface from the mouth of an invisible fish. Though just two sentences seem to be there, but the sentences have been broken into different lines. The first three lines give one idea, that under the shade of a willow tree where the river bends. So it's a place being told to us. It's a scene being created before us, that definitely there's a river and the river water is going. But the important thing is that the river water is going in a bending position. The bend is there, a turn is there, and because of that turn, the water possibly may not be flowing so smooth, and it may go out of the main stream of water and may be reaching some parts of the banks of the water. And these banks of the water can hold the type of small quantity of water. And this all is happening under the shade of a willow tree. Now, this is very important to note, that not only the willow tree is there, but also the shade is there. and therefore we can capture a little bit of timing because the shade will be available only during the daytime. It will not be available at the night time. Because of the presence of daylight, it's possible for us to look at those watery components or water itself which is going outside of the river and is accumulating itself in small open spaces, may be called little puddles, for example. And the poet gives the name to these little puddles as the rock pools. Rock pools are again the places in the rocks, for example, or in any other places where water can stand for some time, and there it can generate certain bubbles, or the air accumulated in the water can generate certain type of shapes, and because of which we can say that some bubbles are forming, some round circles are forming. The poet gives the beauty to his poem by saying that in the rock pool certain prayer beads were rising to the surface. I mean, the bubbles were coming out of that surface, and these bubbles go to resemble with the title of the poem, which is the beads, prayer beads, for example. These beads resemble with the small bubbles which are emerging out of that, and these small bubbles go to show that there possibly is a life beneath that small pool of water, and from that life's mouth it is coming out as its water. So therefore the life could be possibly a fish, or otherwise one can imagine that there is a fish which is bubbling out the air from its mouth, and that's why the bubbles are forming. But the poet wants us to have a very different idea by thinking that when the water enters into these rock pools, automatically the force of the water and the mingling with the air creates some type of bubbles there, and that bubbles, he says, seem to be coming out of the mouth of a fish, and therefore the bubbles are coming, and these bubbles are shining so much in different colors because of the sunlight, because of the water and the air, that it seems to be like the prayer beads, or the beads of a prayer. This thing we can write into critical appreciation by first of all thinking about the poet, writing one passage about the poet, and then we can write one passage summary of the poem, and then we can start with the idea which the poem has presented. After that we can explain, or in a paraphrase we can write what has been said, and then we can discuss different things in the poem. For example, bend of the river, the willow tree, and the shade, or the things should be talked about. The kind of metaphor of rock pool may also be seen, how it is formed, or the examples of that rock pool may be given. And ultimately we can also go to add for the image which is being created in whole of the poem, and the philosophy behind that image, that life can be there, that bubbles can be there, that beautiful scenery can be there. These things we can talk about. We can also go for the rhyme scheme of the poem. Apparently it doesn't have the specific rhyme scheme, neither it has any kind of stanza formation. These are simply the lines, very simple poem without any regular patterns. It is available there. However, we can also find that some of the words which are like fish and the rock pool and the prayer beads, these are the images that the poet has used, or these are the pictures which poet is trying to create, which can be taken some type of device with which he is trying to convey the idea. And then the comparisons can be seen, larger comparisons, not just by using like and as, but by saying that the prayer beads are there. Imagine these prayer beads and then try to see whether the bubbles which are coming out of the rock pool, they are also similar, and in that way connection is with the shape of the bubble and the shape of that prayer bead as well. In that way the beauty is created, in the respect that we possibly can have for those beads of the rosary, same kind of respect and love we may be having for the bubbles which are coming out in the shape of beads from that rock pool. These things we can talk, and then we can also say that whether the poem has any connection with the modern life, has any connection with the nature as well. Definitely it has a connection with nature, the beauty of nature, and how man can adjust within that beauty, how man can hold that beauty in his hand in the shape of a rosary and its beads. That also can be talked about. And then the smallness of the poem, the language used in the poem should be talked, whether the language is simple or not. And apparently it's quite clear that the language is very simple, and it is giving an idea that the poet has tried to give one complete idea in just one go. He wants us to understand this in one go and think about that poem. He doesn't want us to be rambling here and there. Some of the words are difficult and the meaning of these words may be traced out. That is rock pool and that is prayer bead and invisibility. Or one can also talk about that the willow tree, possibly the kind of tree it's going to be as it grows on. So basically the poem is about the water, about the tree, about the sunlight, and then it's about the bubbles which comes out of that, and the poet takes from the larger chunk into the shorter chunk. For example, river is a very large entity of water and the rock pool is again very small, but both the things are surviving in their own way. The beauty is present in both the things. However, the beauty which is present because of the bubbles, that is more important there. So in that way, in the end, we can give a conclusion that the poem is very simple, with simple language, simple style. It gives us a beautiful image as well. Beauty is traced out there, and we are able to understand the poem in a very good way, in a very easy way. That is why the language is simple. And so Daud Kamal has written a very wonderful poem. We can give a judgment on that. So in this way, the critical appreciation of the poem can be written very easily and very effectively as well. Thank you very much for watching. I hope so that everyone has enjoyed this video. And that is why in the end of the video, once again, I can show you the thank you icon. So thank you from me as well. If you have liked this video, please hit the subscribe button to my channel as well. Thank you and Allah Hafiz.